Good evening, and thank you all for joining the 2021 Georgetown Mayor's Summit. First, I would like to extend a welcome to tonight's guest, the Honorable William Peduto, Mayor of the City of Pittsburgh. I am Maria Cancian, Dean of the McCourt School of Public Policy, and I am delighted to be here to set the virtual stage for tonight's panel discussion. At this time of significant change, with concurrent public health, social, and economic crises, in an environment of misinformation and heightened political tension, the work of ethically grounded public servants and the need for evidence-based policy solutions are more urgent than ever. At the McCourt School, tackling the extraordinary policy challenges we face, from the pandemic to climate change to social and economic inequality, is at the heart of our work. We are guided by our commitment to community building and collective action in support of the common good. Just about 1 year ago, the COVID-19 pandemic changed our daily life, challenged our health systems, disrupting the global economy, and heightening existing inequality. While these are immense challenges, there are also many opportunities ahead to address longstanding inequality and to emerge out of this pandemic stronger than before. Those opportunities lie in collaboration across sectors, departments, and levels of government. Tonight's conversation will explore what opportunity there is for city governments to collaborate, lift up local communities, and recover stronger. It is often at the local level where the realities of policy implementation require the most astute problem solving. It is often at the local level where new insights about how best to meet the needs of our communities emerge. I'd like to thank tonight's moderators, Sheila Foster and Uwe Brandis, and a special thank you to our event partners who helped make tonight's conversation possible, Georgetown's Global Cities Initiative and GU Politics. With that, I'll turn things over to McCourt's own MPP student, Dia Porter, to introduce tonight's panel. Dia?
Thank you, Dean. I appreciate that introduction. Good evening. My name is Dia Porter. I am a first-year NPM student at the McCourt School of Public Policy. As a native Washingtonian, I've experienced firsthand the impacts of rapid urbanization, both the positive and the negatives, as a result of inter-city policy changes. The research and dialogues being led by the Global Cities Initiative served as a key guiding factor in my decision to pursue a degree at Georgetown. It's my pleasure to introduce tonight's panelists, beginning with the Honorable William Peduto, Mayor of Pittsburgh. Mayor William Peduto took office at Pittsburgh's 60th mayor in January of 2014. Prior to taking office, he worked for 19 years on the Pittsburgh City Council, 7 years as a staffer, followed by 12 years as a member of council. As a councilman, Bill Peduto wrote the most comprehensive package of government reform legislation in Pittsburgh's history. He strengthened the ethics code, created the city's first campaign finance limits, established lobbyist disclosure and lobbyist registration, and ended no-bid contracts. As mayor, Peduto continues to champion the protection and enhancement of Pittsburgh's new reputation, maintaining fiscal responsibility, establishing community-based development plans, embracing innovative solutions, and becoming a leader in green initiatives. I'd also like to introduce tonight's co-moderators, Uwe Brandis and Sheila Foster. Uwe Brandis is a professor of the practice, faculty director of the Urban and Regional Planning Program, and faculty director of the Georgetown Global Cities Initiative. Brandis is a scholar practitioner in the field of urban design and sustainable urban development. With more than 25 years of experience in the planning, design, and development of new buildings, the public realm, land use controls, and community development partnerships. In addition to his responsibilities at Georgetown, Brandis serves as the chair of the District of Columbia Commission on the Climate Change and Resiliency. Sheila Foster is the Scott K. Ginsburg Professor of Urban Law and Policy at Georgetown. She holds a joint appointment with Georgetown Law School and the McCourt School of Public Policy. Foster is a recognized authority on the role of cities and city leadership in promoting social and economic welfare, achieving environmental and climate justice, improving global governance, and addressing racial inequality. From 2017 to 2020, she served as the chair of the advisory committee for the Global Parliament of Mayors. She's currently a member of the New York City Mayor's Panel of Climate Change and is a former member of the Aspen Institute's Urban Innovation Group. Foster also co-directs LabGov, which is an international flag research project that has pioneered an award-winning approach to economic development that enables local communities to become co-creators and stewards of urban revitalization in their neighborhoods. With that, I will pass it over to Mr. Brandis.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dean Cancian, and thank you to Dia. I just wanted to say a quick note here. The Georgetown Global Cities Initiative is a university-wide interdisciplinary dialogue where faculty, students, and alumni and special guests can come together to reflect on the trends associated with global urbanization and the unique role that cities can play in addressing society's challenges. Please go to our website if you want to join our mailing list. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome Mayor Peduto. Welcome. We're honored to have you tonight, and we're extremely excited to have this time to learn more about what you're doing, certainly learn more about Pittsburgh, and especially learn more about how you see the future from your position as mayor. Mayor, what I thought we'd do is start off, I'd like to have you reflect a little bit more on your personal journey of becoming mayor, then learn a little bit more about Pittsburgh, the kind of long, famous arc of Pittsburgh. But then, of course, we want to drill into where Pittsburgh stands today and how you're marshaling resources. And then I'll turn it over to Professor Foster, and we'll talk more about kind of strategies and how you're moving forward. And we will have Q&A from students. We're really excited about that. So, Mayor, how do you become a mayor? Is that something you always wanted in life? Were you a city council person in order to become mayor, or just tell us a little bit more about how you got to be in the position you're in?
I jokingly say that, you know, I'm the person that never should have become mayor, that I didn't come from a political family, which seems mandatory in Pittsburgh politics. You know, my dad was a school teacher. My mom raised 4 boys. There was never a yard sign in our yard. But I always had a love of history, and I didn't really know where to place it. Unlike the students who are part of a prestigious program that you have at Georgetown, I really didn't know growing up that there was something called urban planning, or that people actually invested time and energy into making sure that systems of systems would be able to work at an urban level. So I studied political science in college. I was not a very good student. I started out at Carnegie Mellon with a full scholarship and ended up at Penn State with 9 credits short of a degree. I would finish that in 5 terms. Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Bush, and then go back and earn my master's degree just to show myself that I could actually succeed in academia. And during that route, my pathway in was through campaign work. So in college, I interned quite a bit. I interned on the Hill. I interned on different political campaigns. And I got to be known in Western Pennsylvania as that kid that uses a computer. During the late 80s, there were no Democratic campaigns that were using a computer. I began to create databases and utilizing information, and became sought after enough that I started my own business. I consulted Democratic elected officials and managed campaigns mainly on the western side of the state. Spent a little bit of time inside the Beltway working on a national project to create the first national database of voter files. And our company was bought by a soft money PAC by the Republican Party called Lawyers for the Republic for the '92 presidential. Came back to Pittsburgh with that information that I learned and created direct marketing and campaigning. By the time I turned 30 in a TV studio in Youngstown, where the media consultant was turning my opponent's face green and changing the shape of his head, I decided that really political campaigns may not be why I wanted to get into this business. So I took a pay cut of 1/2 and moved back home and became the chief of staff to a city council member. I really never thought of myself as working in city government, but I fell in love with it. And not only that, but really immersed myself on both national and international city and urban issues. 7 years later, he decided not to run for re-election. From the person that would tell the candidate and the candidate's wife to button the top button and I decided if I was going to run, I was going to do everything the way I wanted and let the chips fall where they might. And for 12 years, that's what I did on city council. I represented the area of growth, the area of the University of Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon University, Chatham University, Carlow University, the hospitals, the tech firms that were moving in. And for a city that continued to lose population, my district was the only one that was growing. And so I went up against the establishment, which was a long entrenched Democratic machine in Pittsburgh. And 2.5 races later, I was able to win. Now, did I always want to be the mayor? According to my best friend growing up in the 4th grade, I told him that one day I would be the mayor of Pittsburgh. Do I have any desire to run for any other office? None whatsoever. This is what I want to do. This is the area that I want to be involved with. I love it, and it is very different than any other part of government.
That's great. Thank you so much. And Mayor, there may be a few people participating here today that have either not visited Pittsburgh or don't know as much about the history. From my perspective, I think Pittsburgh is one of the most important cities in the world from the perspective of being able to change an urban economy. It's really extraordinary. So I'm wondering if you could reflect on this kind of long arc of change in Pittsburgh and on that long arc of moving from one industry to another. Where is Pittsburgh roughly today?
Well, we're going to take a long arc in a very short time period. So going back all the way to when the Europeans settled, this was a French village with a French fort. We were actually part of Northern Virginia. We were not part of Pennsylvania. And well, I'm cutting ahead to history. And it was the British who came over, and in the Laurel Highlands, just outside of Pittsburgh, the French and Indian War was started. And it was for who would control the forks of the Ohio in the western expansion of this continent. Pittsburgh was a fort town. It relied on resources. Those resources were trees. Coal was discovered along the Monongahela River. We became the center of glass production, and then iron. And then with electrification during the Second Industrial Revolution, we became a global leader in steel. We produced so much steel that the Pittsburgh region itself, just the Pittsburgh region, produced more steel in World War II than Germany and Japan combined. We obviously came out of World War II as the global leader in steel. And during that time, there was a transformation that was taking place to clean the air and clean the water. It created one of the first corporate government partnerships called the Allegheny Conference on Community Development. And the goal was to be able to diversify the economy away from heavy industry, but allowing it to still grow, but moving more towards corporate headquarters. We completely redesigned our downtown. We built it around the automobile. We tore down neighborhoods and low-income neighborhoods and built highways through them and made it very easy for people to leave the city to go home at night and be at home in 15 minutes. And at that same time, we also built up a corporate structure that would become the third largest in the United States, the third most corporate 500 companies in the country: New York, Chicago, Pittsburgh. Our air was cleaner, our water was cleaner. We had diversified our economy. There was prosperity for all as Pittsburgh became not only the birthplace, but really the engine of unions and organized labor. And then 1979 came. In 1979, I was in 9th grade, and the Pirates won the World Series. It's been a long time. The Steelers won their 4th Super Bowl in 6 years, and Pittsburgh died. Our city died. The economic heart of our region, which was the production of steel, was gone. In these places that employed 3,000, 5,000, 1,000, every week you would read about another one closing and shutting down. And for 15 years, 20 years, during my time running political campaigns, every candidate, whether Democrat or Republican, came up with their strategy of how they were going to bring the mills back. But the mills weren't coming back. Because in 1979, as all that was happening, on the campus of Carnegie Mellon University, a new program was being created called robotics. And the study of artificial intelligence was being born. And down the street at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, a small one hospital medical center that supported the medical school, the idea of being able to create new ideas of medicine and the technology around it, those seeds were being sprinkled as well. And over those courses of the years, UPMC has grown to become the largest employer in the state of Pennsylvania. Carnegie Mellon and the University of Pittsburgh are two of the largest research facilities in the country. We are now the home not only of autonomous vehicles, but the autonomous of everything, as we're looking at ways to incorporate machine learning and autonomous instrumentation into every facet of industry, from manufacturing to medical devices to automobiles to planes. And at that same time, our life science industries and others have grown as well. So now Pittsburgh is back again, and our air is even cleaner, and our water is even more pure, and we have a diversified economy. And now our biggest challenge is how do we make it work for everyone? From the PhD to the GED, how can we create good jobs, quality of life, and affordability into the equation? And the real challenge is how do we bake it into the process at the beginning and not have to address it later like we did in the past, in the past before that, in the past before that.
That's great. Thank you. That's really, really amazing to hear you articulate that. Mayor, I'm sure when you ran, my guess is that you did not envision leading the city through a global pandemic. I'm wondering if you could take us into not what you're doing, but kind of what the impact has been of the pandemic in the Pittsburgh, across the Pittsburgh communities. And I'm wondering if you would shed light on, of course, the health issues, but also the chain reaction, as you said before, the system of systems, the chain reaction of other impacts that have occurred over the last year.
Yeah, two things just to start it with. First off is around the 3rd week of January, when the national news was reporting how Wuhan, which is our sister city, was building a hospital in 1 month, and that it would be able to house 800 to 1,000 people. This was already after they had tent hospitals up. We were sending them supplies from our hospital networks. We realized something was really wrong. And if the numbers that were coming out were true, the real numbers were probably even worse. So we began in the 3rd week of January putting together our preparations. So we were able to get our PPE early. We were able to be well stocked. We were able to put together our emergency plan from other types of outbreaks that we had had pretty much sitting on the shelf for a decade, upgrade them all to COVID, work with our hospitals, and then begin scenario planning with the CDC. This would be, what would happen if people couldn't come to work? Do we have enough laptops? Are the people who are working at home connected? Will the system that we have be able to not be easily hacked? What happens if 40% of our police officers are positive? What happens if we're not able to pick up the garbage? In going through every type of scenario planning and putting together an outcome-based plan. And we did all of that between January and the beginning of April. So by the time that we were shutting down in mid-March, we had already had almost all of our scenario planning completed. The interagency and the intercommunication is very difficult in Pittsburgh because we are a municipality, but the county runs our health department. And in almost every other county in Pennsylvania, the state runs the health department. And then to add another layer upon that, Pittsburgh is the most fractionalized government structure in America, meaning we have more government per capita than anywhere else. For a county of 1.2 million people, we have 130 local governments. Imagine that. We're number one. You know, New York has 8 million people under one government. We have 130 under 1.2 million. It's difficult to put in a curb cut at a Burger King, let alone be able to administer services in a global pandemic. So we had to then be able to have our public safety sort of help to coordinate all the smaller municipalities that are around us, while recognizing the county is in its leadership role as making sure that the health of the people were being done. It was logistically one of the most difficult parts of our job. I would say this, that we had gone through a series of crises over the past 7 years. We had a financial crisis where the previous administration had left us a structural deficit and no reserve fund to be able to pay it, and a pension fund that was going to be reaching a critical point of funding. We had a housing crisis with affordability. We had a water crisis with lead. Then we had the horrific event at Tree of Life. And each time we learned a little bit more. And the first thing that we learned, one of the most important lessons that I tell other mayors, is you have to have a North Star. You have to have what it is that you are guiding your decision-making around. Under Tree of Life, we recognize that the North Star were the victims' families. Any decision that we would make would be based on, does it benefit the victims' families? The second group would be those that were injured and making sure that they were healed. The third group would be the Jewish community of Pittsburgh, and the fourth was the greater community of Pittsburgh. So when you're making a decision that seems as easy as whether or not to keep a critical road open during a funeral, and your public safety director is telling you it's an access route to the hospitals, we can't close it. You're able to go back and say, but what does the family want? And they say, the family wants it closed. Close it. So when we're in this now pandemic, we have a North Star, which is the greater health of all of Pittsburgh. So does that mean we shut down the St. Patrick's Day parade, which has never been shut down in the history, including the great snowstorm of '93, where they marched through 58 inches of snow? Yes, because the greater health of Pittsburgh is what our decision is being based around. And when you have that type of an approach, decision-making becomes much easier. And it is absolutely critical if you are the mayor, because your job is not to implement. Your job isn't even to be able to recommend what the data shows and what the evidence is and what the best path is. Your job is to pick A, B, or C. And you can have all those people around you to help to make that best decision. But without that North Star, it becomes very complicated.
Great. Sheila, I'd like to turn it over to you, but let me just make this quick announcement. For all of the Georgetown students with us here, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen to submit your questions, and then that will feed into, I'll receive those and I'll be able to include those questions in our Q&A portion. So Sheila, please.
Great. Thank you, Mayor, so much for joining us today. I've always been fascinated by your city, Pittsburgh, and I agree that we have so much to learn from Pittsburgh and from mayors in particular. And I wanted to follow up on the history of Pittsburgh, and in particular, the move from an industrial to one might say a knowledge or innovation economy. I was born in Detroit, and at a time when Detroit was very successful. And as we know, it has struggled to make this transition that Pittsburgh has successfully made. I've also spent some time in Camden. I taught at Rutgers Camden, another post-industrial city that's had that difficulty. So I've always been fascinated by Pittsburgh's ability to make that shift. I wonder if there are any lessons from this experience that Pittsburgh has had along two fronts. One is to withstand shocks, economic shocks, and also, as we know, public health shocks. So the move from industrial to a knowledge economy, what lessons might there be for that kind of economy's ability to be more resilient in the face of shocks? And the second is on equity. Because as we know, with knowledge and innovation economies, if we think about the Bay Area and other areas that have strong innovation economies, often a lot of folks are left behind. So what lessons can we learn from Pittsburgh about building that kind of economy where you bring along more people?
Great. First off, I think you're absolutely right. The two things that cities work to prepare on, and it's global, are shocks and stresses. The shocks sometimes you'd never imagine. The worst act of anti-Semitism in American history. Never would have thought that it would be Pittsburgh, which has a very strong interfaith community. The stresses you see, and they're there and they're happening all the time. And they can be inequity, and it can be based upon race, or it can be based upon geography, or it could be infrastructure and just the wear and tear and not investing back. I mean, the stresses are something that is very tangible and that you can see. The shocks sometimes will catch you. So when you go through an economic depression, which Pittsburgh went through, we had unemployment that was higher than the Great Depression for almost the entire 80s when I was going through college. We had the debt structure of the city higher than New York City's when they went bankrupt. Over 20% of our budget just went to paying off debt because we had no tax base, so we just kept borrowing every year and borrowing. All of the indicators that we had basically showed us to be at the lowest economic structure of any government in the country throughout this country's history. So in the one way, the way that we were able to come back was by hitting rock bottom. It's not as if people didn't warn in the 70s of the falling of America's industrial manufacturing base. It's that we never prepared for it. There's an old saying, if you don't, I hate to be that person that gets this quote wrong. Let me try it really quick. Nobody plans to fail. You only fail to plan. And we didn't plan. So I'm going to jump real quick and then come back. So now here we are. And we have this knowledge-based economy, and we've got companies from around the world coming in to create research centers and innovation centers, and all the big boys are here, the Googles, the Tatas, the Microsofts, the Intels, and they're all, you know, recruiting Pittsburgh graduates and letting them stay here, unlike my generation that had to leave to get a job. But right on the fringe of us is the fossil fuel industry. It's the extraction of coal that has kept that community 40 miles away open for the past 150 years. It's natural gas and it's fracking, and then taking that excess fracking and cracking it. And what we don't talk about is the opportunity cost that's associated with that, because it's hard then to recruit those candidates that you need to continue to build that diversified economy when the threat of the air quality for their children, they don't have to live in Pittsburgh. Part of that is the not recognizing where the world is going and not planning and not preparing to help those communities that aren't going to have that mine, aren't going to have fracking. The cracker plant is going to close down. And when all of that happens, we're back in 1980. Or we can spend the next 15 years investing heavily in renewable energies and having the region that built America once build it again by working to use American steel to build wind turbines, by assembling solar panels in West Virginia that are being manufactured in Ohio, right down the street from Lordstown, which is producing electric buses to be able to change the transportation system of this country so we don't have to buy them from China. And we're missing this opportunity in getting into a debate whether we should be using fossil fuels or renewable energy, and not thinking out the transition time that will be necessary and the investment that is absolutely critical right now. Lesson one, we have to learn from our own mistake before we make it again. Then the second lesson, when it comes to equity, and you see this throughout a lot of the East cities, the Baltimores, the Clevelands, the Pittsburghs, for some reason during that economic collapse, the Black middle class left. Many went south. Others went to the suburbs or the first ring suburbs. The white middle class stayed, and you end up with even greater disparity in these cities because you have areas that were historically Black neighborhoods that now become low-income neighborhoods. And the challenge of being able to provide adequate services, being able to develop in a mixed-use sense of housing and everything else becomes even more difficult, especially rebuilding those neighborhood business districts that were thriving 30, 40 years ago. And so it requires additional investment and additional resources and additional programs that are specific to it to recognize the demographic shift that occurred. It's much easier to build a neighborhood back that didn't lose its middle class than to try to build a neighborhood back where the middle class sought a better life somewhere else. And what you end up with is compounded issues around racial disparity that are very real. So I know Detroit's facing it. I had the opportunity once to talk to President Obama, and we were talking about the comparison between Pittsburgh and Chicago. And he brought that up. And he was the one who said that one of the reasons that Pittsburgh was able to rebound and come back is because it hadn't lost so many of its neighborhoods, that there were still places where families were moving into. There were still places where generations of families wanted to stay. And the same thing happened in Chicago, but you didn't see it across the board. And when you look deeper by race, you saw that middle class leaving those neighborhoods.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. Let's drill down a little bit on the racial reckoning moment that we're in. I do think that cities like Pittsburgh and other cities are really at the forefront of trying to address this moment, the legacy effects of redlining and of segregation. So we know that zoning was put in place to protect property values and to entrench residential segregation. We know that if the neighborhoods that were redlined are also now the neighborhoods that suffered the most from the foreclosure crisis and are suffering from the heat impacts of climate change. One of the things that cities are doing are looking at local policy like single family zoning, doing away with single family zoning, as well as defunding the police. And I know that you're doing a lot on these issues. And so I just wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about what the city is doing to reckon with these legacy effects.
So I don't believe that any city could have a one-size-fits-all solution. If they did, everybody would be doing it. And we have to understand the uniqueness within a city of each neighborhood, and then what the challenges are. As urban planners, you know, the idea is that SWOT analysis always was the translation of a community voice to an implementation plan. So asking people who live in a neighborhood, what is its strengths? What are the things that are here you don't want to lose? And so many times they'll come down to local businesses that are unique local businesses, or a church or a school or some other institution, because that's what a community is. It's not housing. We lost that in the 60s and the 70s, where we just built housing on top of hills without anything around it, encapsulated poverty, and said good luck. And that model didn't work. The second part is weaknesses. What are those things that are there that you don't want to be in your community? The next part is opportunities and threats. What isn't there that you want to bring in? And then threats, what isn't there that you want to keep out? And if you use that as basic tools and you start to develop a community-based development system, you'll find that the priorities will differ neighborhood by neighborhood. So when you're talking about defunding the police, in many neighborhoods, especially those that would be considered over-policed, people will tell you they don't see the police enough, and that they feel the police are in the affluent neighborhoods, and they're in the affluent business districts, and they're walking the beats there, but they're not walking the beats in their neighborhoods. And what they, for the most part, want in the neighborhoods that have that viewpoint is more community-oriented policing, meaning all the way back to Sergeant Friendly, who walks the beat and everybody knows who they are, and preferably lives in the neighborhood as well. They want to go back to a system where it's not somebody cruising by you in a car with sunglasses on, but somebody who knows who your first name is and is a part of your neighborhood. When you're dealing with the issues of zoning, you're dealing, as you said, with the historic overlay that was systemic, that it wasn't a coincidence that there were neighborhoods where you couldn't get a mortgage. It was planned that way. And you have to be able to create a new toolbox. The tools that we've used for the past 20 years haven't worked. So honored, and I'll be talking to him this week, Mayor Tubbs, to join with him on a guaranteed basic income. I'm sure that the 20 plus cities that will be implementing it this year will be able to show by the research being done by the University of Tennessee and the University of Pennsylvania that a guaranteed income is a much better structure than federal programs that limit it to powdered milk and cheese. That an individual, when given the ability to choose what they need in order to be able to better themselves, will choose the right path and will be able to break cycles of poverty. We're going to be discussing with HUD a new program that we want to pilot here, which allows your federal voucher not to be used just for a rent, to be used for a mortgage, and partner with financial institution in Pittsburgh to be able to assure that they'll be willing to accept that as the mortgage payment. So instead of after 20 years of living in the apartment, you have nothing, you now have your home, which is the equity that you're able to give to your children, which is how wealth gets built. And I think we have to just start rethinking a lot of different programs from the federal level all the way down to the local. And what mayors have an opportunity right now, which we haven't had in 50 years, or at least not since 1968, is the opportunity to get people who have been sitting on the sidelines to be able to become partners. For those that have said, you know, that's not our business is whatever, who are now asking, how can we help? We need to get them involved in creating these new programs. We've created a program called Avenues of Hope. And what makes it different than most of our other programs is it isn't a brick and mortar program, even though we're working in 7 historically Black communities that haven't seen any new investment in the business district in 50 years. What we're doing is not only fixing up the buildings to look pretty, but we're looking in the neighborhood itself for entrepreneurs. And we're training the entrepreneurs to be able to start their own businesses and offering them 2 years of free rent or very low rent in order to be able to get their business off the ground, to rebuild their neighborhood, to get their neighborhood business back, to get that coffee shop to move next door, and to help to start to build it. For all the disinvestment we made over decades, we owe it to now invest, and we can't do it alone. It has to come from cities, foundations, universities, hospitals, corporations, and the partnerships between multi-levels of government.
That's great. So exciting to hear about what you're doing. The last question I have is really picking up on the Universal Basic Income network of mayors. And for you just to say a little bit about why you think mayors are leading like this right now. And what I mean by like this, you're part of not just this UBI network, but a network of mayors on climate. And you famously wrote an op-ed with the mayor of Paris after we pulled out of the climate agreement. We're back in now, saying that cities will get it done, will meet the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement, even if the US pulled back. Can you just say a little bit more for us about how you see mayors' role vis-a-vis governors and the federal government in solving some of these, the issues of our time, climate, racial justice, economic inequality? I just want to hear more, because you're standing with these innovative mayors like Tubbs, like Garcetti, and others working together, even when you don't have cooperation from above.
So on a personal level, I find no greater satisfaction of governance or politics than working with mayors, not only through this country, but throughout this world. Everyone speaks a common language. We agree on 99% of issues, no matter what political parties. I stand with Republican mayors and looking at common sense gun reform. They stand with us on funding public transportation. It's a very different world. There's a joke amongst mayors that there's 3 parties in the United States right now: Democrats, Republicans, and mayors. And we just don't have the time to be able to pontificate, because we got to pick up the trash on Monday morning. So it's a very different world. I think that subnationalism is going to be a very growing area in governance over this next decade. I think what Georgetown's doing and understanding it on a global basis, and how cities from around the world can partner on initiatives, is a really interesting idea. We're doing so with the city of Aarhus in the Netherlands, in Denmark. I was getting my Denmark and Netherlands mixed up. And Aarhus is 100% fueled by direct energy. So we've partnered with them, with the Swanson School of Engineering at the University of Pittsburgh, and we're developing pilot programs in direct energy with the goal of Pittsburgh becoming off the grid and being able to power our neighborhoods. If you really want to tackle affordable housing, you're going to have to tackle the issue of utility cost. Pittsburgh has one of the lowest costs of energy in the entire country, because we burn coal, but we have one of the highest utility bills, because our houses are over 100 years old, and we have very cold winters and very hot summers. And so we have to come up with new ways of providing that. The idea that cities have the ability to solve global problems better than national countries was not born at the Paris Agreement, although there were over 500 mayors that attended. It was the largest gathering of mayors in the Earth's history. And it was a very simple message that we gave. We just said, we got this. Sign the damn paper. It doesn't matter. We're going to have to do it anyways. We're doing it. And not only are we doing it, but we're competing against each other to see who can do it best. And we're using that not only in order to be able to save our planet, but we're building new industries through it. And we're competing against each other to see where those industry clusters are going to land. So, you know, as you look around the world and you see all these different areas, it's one learning off the other and competing at the local level. But it came about even before that. As we were talking about climate, we were also going through the global emergency of the refugee crisis and in Syria. And what mayors around the world said is, just give us a certain amount. If we all agree, we'll take Pittsburgh's in for 400, Cleveland's in for 550, Detroit 1100, Youngstown, Ohio 28, you know, and we know what it is. There is no refugee crisis. And mayors around the world get it. And then it gets tangled up in the craziness of Washington. And we don't make it a political issue. It's an issue, you know, we can use additional people. We can certainly handle additional people. And for many of our cities, we're looking for additional people. So it really became absolutely crystal clear then. But as we look at the issues that face the world, I'm proud to represent, there's a group called the Global Covenant of Mayors, and we focus on climate and resiliency. There's now over 10,000 cities that are a part of this. Mayor Reed from Atlanta was the founding mayor for the United States, and upon his retirement, I've had that opportunity to have that chair. It's an amazing organization. And I think, you know, as you hear about the Gates and the Bloombergs and everybody else who want to now start to invest in solutions to climate change, it's going to be a lot more focused on the local level than on the federal.
That's great. You were channeling my old friend, Dr. Ben Barber, with whom I work to launch the Global Parliament of Mayors. Mayors get it done. They're non-ideological, and very much we've seen evidence of that. Back to you, Uwe Brandes, to take student questions.
That's great. Thank you. Mayor, the first question comes from Dia Porter, who gave our introduction at the start of this program. She's a graduate student at the McCourt School. And she asks, you know, with COVID, and with the, you know, snowstorms this winter, how are you thinking about homelessness? And what are you doing differently about homelessness today that maybe you weren't doing a year ago? And specifically, you know, how does, you know, the issues of public health transition into mental health, affordable housing, and so on?
So, for years, we've been talking about the need of having a organization within city government that deals with three critical communities: our homeless community, those that are struggling with addiction, and those that are having mental health issues that require additional public services. And in many cases, you're dealing with all three with the same individual. And people always, you know, ask, why are they all in the city? Well, that's where the services are. If they need a meal, that's where they're going to get it. If they need to have their clothes washed, that's where they're going to get it. If they're having a medical emergency with their foot, that's where they're going to get it, or a toothache. All the services are centralized to be able to provide it to the individual. So in city after city, you're seeing more and more people who are finding themselves falling through the safety net and requiring those services. And in city after city, you're seeing more people who are living on the streets. But it's not just the people that are living on the streets that are homeless. It's the people who are couch surfing and living in different friends' basements, the ones that are living in the car. And you need to be able to address all of them. I would ask anybody on this to go to bigburgh.com, BIGBURGH. We have the H at the end. It's a long story. Bigburgh.com. What bigburgh.com is an app we created. There's only 3 of them in the world. And it will show you whatever it is that you need if you find yourself in difficult times. And it's really helpful that over half of our homeless community has access to a smartphone. And in all of our libraries, all of our service providers also have it right when you walk in on their computer so you can find it. And it is a way to be able to get the critical needs you need. But at the same time, it's when an officer is on duty and there's somebody who is passed out in a doorway or acting peculiar, they now have it right on their cell phone, and they can direct you not to go over to the north side or the east end, but right to where the address is, and just simply call the number and let them know you're coming on and are on the way. We've also created a new Office of Community Health Services, and this hasn't existed in the city of Pittsburgh for at least 80 years. The health department used to be in the city, then it moved and became part of county government. What it does is it's a street action organization. We gave 2 of our ambulances. We've partnered with one of our hospitals. We've got their street people who work and know the people living on the streets. And we're providing direct access so that when we get the 911 call about the person screaming downtown and walking with the shirt off in the middle of winter, they're sent along with the police officer. And the police officer's job is to make sure they're safe and the people around them are safe. And once that's been determined, the police officer's job is to leave and then to be able to hand it off to professionals. This is based off of the model out of Washington State. And I can't think of the name, but we've just instituted that this past year. So it's still in the, I would call the pilot stage, but we've been able to get corporate sponsors and others to help to support the finance of it. And third is we've needed a new all-year shelter that is low barrier that provides wraparound services for the past decade. And through this crisis, we have gotten PNC Bank to become the lead sponsor of it. We donated the land, and we're at the construction phase right now.
That's great. The second question comes from Jay Killian, a PhD student at Georgetown. And he asks, he's building on your previous remarks here, he's asking about your preparations for the pandemic as compared to other cities. And when the pandemic hit, were you looking around and seeing other cities and wishing you had done what they had done? And conversely, did other cities turn to you and say, gee, you're doing something really great. Can we learn from you?
Mayors always share, and mayor, like I said, it's my greatest joy when I get to work with another mayor. So there were probably specifics into conversations where ideas would have come up, but there was not one city that we were looking at and saying, you know, look at what Houston's doing. We have to have that same plan in place. Dr. Burks did a tour and she was visiting several cities as we were getting out of the summer season, getting ready to get into the second wave. And during that, we were able to brief her on our public safety plan. She then took it and used it as a model for other cities to be able to look at that may not have been, may not have had something completely written out and being implemented. No, we basically have, I have an extraordinary staff. I'm just going to put it simple. So my chief operation officer was part of the West Wing with the Obama administration, and was also the chief of staff to Janet Napolitano when she was Homeland Security Director. And so she had a very good understanding of crisis management and the ability to build out scenario planning. And my staff took the advice of the CDC, and early on, there was a lot of different opinions about what people ought to be doing, what should be open, what should be closed, should you wear a mask, shouldn't you wear a mask, everything else. Just like I talked about that North Star, our guide was the CDC. We had a National League of Cities meeting at the end of February last year. And at that meeting, CDC officials came and told us, this is real, guys. We're not getting the help we need in Washington. We need you to shut down your cities. And within a week, we were shutting down operations.
I've got another great question here from Joel Burke. He's a master's student at the McDonough School of Business. And he asks, with the rise of remote work, which we're all too familiar with, how do you make Pittsburgh more competitive and attractive for people who can work anywhere in the world? So that's kind of a remote working, remote learning question. I'm going to add a twist to that question, and I want you to speak a little bit about transit as well, and how you're dealing with public transit in the face of an entirely new digital future.
One of the, when you're looking at being able to recruit or to have people that can individually work within any city, cities like Pittsburgh, our greatest target is boomerangs. People who grew up in the city, moved away for the job opportunity, but still have the family here, and returning back home, knowing the city, still having friends here. It's an easier attraction. And at 56 years old, I'm seeing my friends, some of whom, their children are in college now, and they're coming back simply for that one reason. They don't have to work in the cities that they raised their families in. Other than that, it's really through industry cluster. The focus of attention into the life sciences, especially around biologicals, around robotics, artificial intelligence, predictive analytics, all of these different fields, it sort of sells themselves with the amount of capacity that we've built. There's really good career opportunities for parallel rising in careers that we didn't have 5 or 10 years ago. And the need to, or the not the need to have to be in a central location. The third part is with those companies, especially the startups that have decided to locate in Washington, Philadelphia, New York, and Boston, the cost of living here is a fraction of that. So you can still have the office, you can use it and not use it, and not be bankrupted by it. And for so many companies that have employees working at home and haven't really made that decision of, are they ready to pull the cord on having a central location, Pittsburgh is a safe island. And then with public transportation, the only reason that it hasn't gone bankrupt around this country is federal action. And it's going to need it not only through this year, but through next year as well. One thing that we're seeing is young people have not left it. I think a lot of older passengers that rely upon it have become a little less likely to use it. I expect that will return at some point, but for the young people, especially our university students who live in the city, it's still option A on being able to get from A to B.
Our last question comes from Melanie Gerke, and she asks about your broader sustainability strategy. And the question is, in the face of presumably lower capital budgets as a byproduct of the pandemic. How are you thinking about your sustainable strategy differently than you may have a year ago?
I would argue the counter and say, thank you, Joe Biden. With the potential $1 trillion investment act into infrastructure, knowing the people that are running some of these departments, they're going to want to check a lot of boxes. So it's not going to be a transportation allocation is out there where you can just apply and build a highway. You're going to have to build a highway. You're going to have to deal with stormwater runoff in a green infrastructure way to lessen the effects to the sewer system. You're going to have to be able to do it to lower carbon and at the same time have a workforce development program that helps low-income individuals to be able to get the jobs and pay union wages. I mean, there's going to be a lot of boxes that you're going to have to check in order to be able to have a competitive project to be able to go to. And so we're thinking of how we can do that. In Pittsburgh, we call it P4. All of our economic development strategy is based around people, planet, place, and performance. And we actually have a metric that we utilize in order to be able to measure competitive applications to see which ones measure the highest under the P4 standards. I think you'll see that type of philosophy being embedded in the Biden administration with the infusion of more dollars. And what we've done is, we've taken the broad approach of a 2030 plan. And our 2030 plan, most cities, not most, but a lot of cities have, it's 150-0. So city operations being run off of 100% renewable energy, a 50% reduction of our energy use and water use, and zero waste. We got to 100% renewable last year. So we were able to receive the U.S. Conference of Mayors Environmental Award. We not only did that, but we were able to pool our energy buying with groups like the Pittsburgh Zoo and the Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority to the point where we're no longer buying energy, and it's all renewable, in the heart of coal country by retail prices. We're buying wholesale so that the taxpayers of the city of Pittsburgh saved hundreds of thousands of dollars in the process, and we bought a local first in order to support the growing industry of renewable energy in our area. We are the home of coal. We are 40 miles south of where natural gas, or where oil was discovered, and we sit on one of the largest formations of natural gas in the world. And today in Allegheny County, there are more jobs in renewable energy than coal, oil, and gas combined.
That's great. Sheila, I'm going to turn it over to you to help close it out.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. You have once again demonstrated why Pittsburgh is a city to watch. And we thank you for that on climate, on inequality, on resilient economies. I think that really what you've accomplished there is really amazing. And also the role of mayors, actually, that although Georgetown is literally in the seat of the federal government, we have many students, as you've heard tonight, and increasingly many programs focused on the role that local governments and local leaders play. And the networks of mayors are, like yourself, are leading. And if we want to know where progress is being made across the board, we will continue to look at the networks of mayors, like the one that you're in with Mayor Tubbs. So we thank you. I want to give you the last word. Is there anything you want to say to students or our audience about how they can contribute to the work of mayors?
Yeah, I would say this. I mean, obviously to the students, you have earned a position at one of the most prestigious schools in the world in a program where it's recognized globally. Many of you probably wanted to be in Washington, to be around Capitol Hill and around federal issues or international issues. But but there is the entire cross-section between subnational and international policy and programming. The work in the treaties and the type of policies that are created at a federal level are implemented at a local. And having that cross-section and that opportunity that you'll have through your education at Georgetown and the internship opportunities that are all around you. If you are interested in making a difference, if you really want to see the effects that it has on a young family's life or on a street or in a neighborhood, the best way to do so, it may seem, is Congress, but it's really City Hall. And I just ask you to think about that as you're thinking about where your career path will be taking you. The talents that you have are recognized by Georgetown, and they're talents that this country needs right now in cities all across this country, but most particular in the place you call home. I want to just say hello to my friend Mayor Bowser, who as a young woman received her advanced education in a city called Pittsburgh, only to use it and to return home to make her city better.
What a perfect way to end. Thank you so much for your time, Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Really appreciate it. Thank you
Yep.
so much.